Imagine if each morning when you wake up, you're smiling and looking forward to your day, knowing you are happy even while you're dealing with grief and loss. The Grief and Happiness podcast inspires, comforts, and supports you with each new episode. I'm Emily Zero-Threat, welcoming you to explore with me your life of endless possibilities. Aloha. I'm so glad that you're here with us today. I have a guest that you're absolutely going to love, and I know that because I've had him on my podcast before. And he's quite brilliant, and he's come out with a new book with his writing partner, and they have done some investigation about the things that you really shouldn't say to people when somebody dies. So welcome, John. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back. It's good to be back.
When I read his book, I've heard people say some pretty terrible things, and people, they think they're saying the right thing. They think they're being compassionate when they say, "Oh, you're young, you can get married again," or that sort of thing. What inspired you to do this book in particular?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Carolyn Gower, who is my co-author on the book, we also do a podcast together. And our third episode of the podcast was entitled "The Stupid Shit People Say to Grievers." And we posted on our social media pages, if you've ever had a comment said to you and you want to, maybe we'll read it on the podcast episode, submit. We were overwhelmed with the comments, not only the amount of comments, the volume that we received, but also what people were saying. So we did that episode. I don't even know maybe 50 or 60 episodes into our podcast now. And that is still the most popular episode we've ever done. So Carolyn asked me a few months after that episode came out, she said, "Hey, do you think we should turn this into a book?" Because the amount of messages and what people were saying, I've done almost 5,000 coaching sessions and it still had my jaw drop. And we felt like if we can put this into a book, not only do we shine a bright light on what an issue this is in our society, but we also help grieving people understand they're not alone in this. And we can hopefully urge society to do better. Like, we need to do better when it comes to grief in our culture.
It's for sure. And I know frequently people will just say what they've heard somebody else say before, and they don't really think about what they're talking about. And I often think, how would you feel if somebody said that to you?
Right.
How would you take it? Because when you put it in a perspective like that, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that to whoever it was.
Right.
But instead, we just do things by rote. And right. I know I started off complaining about the phrase, "I'm sorry for your loss." And for me, it was because so many people said it. It was like, "Have a nice day." And yep. I got to the point where I couldn't stand to hear it one more time. It was, to me, it was hurtful because I thought, you're just blowing this off. You're saying something because you feel obligated to, but it's not that you care, because you go right on to the next sentence as soon as you say it.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because that's one of the things I struggle with the most. So again, like, I am a full-time coach, public speaker. I've done over 5,000 coaching sessions. If I meet someone in person, I go to a grief conference and I'm talking to someone in person, I can give them my heart. I can look into their eyes. They know that I care. I can say words, whether they're comforting or validating or inspiring, like, I can give them my heart. But a lot of people email me. They'll follow me on social media. They'll listen to the podcast, whatever, and they'll email me and they'll tell me about their loss. And for a long time, like, what am I going to do? Like, basically what would come out is kind of like, "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss," right? Because I am, but it felt so empty on my part. And one of the things I started doing about 6 months ago is now, if somebody emails me about their loss, it's still, there's only so much I can give over an email, but I will actually open the space for them. And I will say, hey, if you ever want to tell me a story about your deceased husband or your child who you lost, I would love to read it. There's only so much we can do, especially like via email and stuff, but opening that space for someone to know that it's okay if they talk about their person and it's actually welcomed here, I think that's one of the small things we can do.
I think that's so good. I know what I always tell people when they ask me for advice about it is I tell them to say something about, use the name of the person who died and say something nice about them, a nice memory or something. Because then you're kind of flipping the script to make it on something good and positive and the love that was there instead of the negativity that comes out.
100%.
I understand the writing thing too, because a lot of times people just need to be listened to. It's not that they even care what you have to say. They just need to tell their story enough times that they don't have to tell anymore.
Yeah. I always say, like, I never, ever, ever expected anyone to understand my pain. Of course, no one can understand my pain. Even another widowed person, like we can understand generally if we have a similar loss, but everyone's pain is so unique and individual to that. I never expected anyone to understand my pain. What I always expected is for everyone to respect my pain. And as we unfortunately see in this book, that doesn't always happen.
Yeah. And a lot of the lack of respect in your book, I don't think comes from a person intentionally not being respectful. It's just that they say something stupid because people are so uncomfortable with death and dying.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that for the most part, people mean well. Carolyn and I have a page in this book talking about the difference between something stupid said to you and something mean. That being said, I do think that there's more mean things than we think there are, not just in this book, but in society, because I think society as a whole doesn't understand grief and is grief illiterate and doesn't understand the magnitude of the loss. So compassion, respect, if you don't understand the magnitude of the loss, sometimes those things, the compassion, the respect are absent, and mean things can come out of people's mouths.
That's right. And it's shocking. It'll kind of take your breath away when somebody says something like that to you. And I never expected things like that. And somebody would pull something, some grudge or something that they had years ago over something, and they just kind of felt like they had to express it or it wouldn't go away. And it's like, don't tell me, I don't need to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Again, I mean, we're adults. And I'm sorry, like that's what separates us from being 4 years old. We should have a filter and we should think before we speak. And it really is as easy as you said, treat other people the way you would want to be treated. Speak to other people the way you would want to be spoken to. It's not hard. We make it a lot harder than it is. It's not hard. Have a filter, think before you speak, lead and live with kindness.
That's right. That one word, kindness, if you just keep that in your mind as you're speaking to someone who's dealing with grief, then you'll do a lot better. Whatever it is that you say, it's going to be a lot better. If you think about it before you say it and think, is what I'm going to say kind? And don't say it if it's not.
Yeah, right. And I also think sometimes we don't need words. Sometimes we don't need words. One of my favorite pages in this book is when I talk about Memorial Day, a couple of years after Michelle passed. And I was having, up until that time, the worst day that I had experienced. And I can remember just for hours and hours that day, being in my bathroom, staring at the mirror, crying. Like one of those times where your pain is so bad and nobody else in the world sees your pain. So it's like on some weird level, you want to see your pain. And I was just sobbing for hours and hours. And I finally pulled myself together and I went and I drove to my sister's where we were going to have a family barbecue. And I couldn't go in the house. And about a mile away, there was a Holiday Inn that had closed. And I knew that. And I went and I drove to that parking lot of the closed hotel. And I sat there for a few more hours and I sobbed. And finally, I was able to pull myself together and go to my sister's. and her master bedroom is right off the front door. And as soon as she opened the door, I kind of like nodded at her to come into the master bedroom with me. My sister and I have a decent relationship. We're not super close though. And I just started sobbing and sobbing. And all she did was rub my back. And that's all I wanted in that moment. That's all I needed. I didn't need any words. I didn't need any encouragement. I just needed someone to respect my pain and sit with me in that pain. That's what she did. And it was invaluable, right? Absolutely. Completely invaluable.
It's so compassionate. And so you just bring me to tears having you tell about it. It reminded me of, I think, probably my lowest point was after my first husband died. And we had a really good friend. He was an interesting person. Not very many people liked him, but he was absolutely brilliant. And I found him fascinating. And so did my husband. And he'd come over. He was one of the few people that would come visit my husband right until the end. Because most people, the sicker he got, the further away they stayed. When he first got sick, right, it was flowers and visits and everything. And the longer he was sick, the more they were gone. But he was always there. And he was much younger than my husband. And he had developed cancer, and where we lived, with the insurance he had to go to Los Angeles for the treatment instead of being able to stay at home. And they had him stay in a motel by himself. And before he even started the treatment, started hemorrhaging in the motel by himself and died. It blew me away. It was like all the grief from my husband came crashing down with the grief from my friend. And I'd been doing a pretty good job of being okay and working on dealing with it until that happened. And I understand that kind of crying. It went on and on and on. I went to his memorial service and I had to leave and come home and just sat there and cried.
Yep.
And there was nobody there to witness that. And it's really sad when that sort of thing happens. If you can have that rub on the back is so important and something to keep in mind when you're dealing with someone that you would like to provide some comfort for. You know, you can just go and sit with them. I had, after Ron died, one of my friends dropped by and she said, "We're going to the beach. We're going to go for a walk." And she said, "I know you probably don't feel like walking, so bring your chair and I'll go for a walk and you sit at the beach. But you need to be out. You need to breathe and get out of the narrow frame of reference that you've got right now."
I think that goes back to like respecting our pain. And I think when we have those moments where we're grieving hardcore, where we cannot stop crying, where we think we'll never get up off the floor and nobody sees our pain, right? Like it just makes us feel so much more lonely. And I've told that story about Memorial Day, I don't know, maybe 10 times throughout my life, sometimes to clients, sometimes on podcasts because it's in the book. So I'm referencing it. That was the first time as I was saying it that I articulated, I wanted to see my own pain. Because nobody else in the world of 7 billion plus people, nobody else in that moment was seeing my pain, and I needed to see it for myself. And that's the first time that like I even had that realization. Because again, when we're in it by ourselves, it just makes us feel even more lonely than we already felt.
Oh yeah. And that's just so important. It's part of the self-care. That's what I always suggest people do when they ask me what is the first thing they should do when they're dealing with grief. And I say, take care of yourself.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. And that's a very valuable part of self-care, is recognizing where you are, what you're going through, and knowing that it's okay. And it won't last forever at this intensity.
Right. I host a workshop about self-care, and we look at it in a lot of different ways, right? In a million different ways, not just the chocolate cake and the bubble baths that people think about. And one of the many ways that I look at self-care is grieving the way that you need to grieve, not letting anyone, whether it's family, friends, strangers, society, dictate how you grieve. And then also being honest with yourself about the magnitude of the loss and the pain. And that doesn't mean that we have to sit there and say we have the worst life in the history of the world. That's not what I'm saying. But when we're honest with ourselves about the magnitude of the loss and the depth of the pain, I think what it does is it does a lot of things. But one of the things I think it does is we're able to then properly give ourselves credit for how far we have come, for how hard we fought to survive, for how hard we fought to get back up on our feet and start rebuilding. When we're honest about our pain, we're able to see that very clearly. And giving ourselves credit is so important because that's how we build the momentum to keep going.
That's right. Wow. Well, I want to talk about your book a little bit too. Right. I know we're talking about everything around it, but I was just so impressed with your book that somebody's finally saying, "Don't say this,"
Right.
And I think people don't realize they say it. If you read it in your book, you probably aren't going to say those words anymore because you probably will get like, "Oh my gosh." Can you give us some examples of the sort of thing that they can see in your book?
Yeah. So, I mean, we have a lot of the typical stuff. Like you said, oh, you're young, you'll find love again. We have a lot of the platitudes, they're in a better place, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, as far as platitudes are concerned, my theory on platitudes is if I want to say it about my loss, that's fine. Don't come and deliver them to my door, right? We have a lot of heartfelt stories in this. We have a lot of helpful tips for the grieving person and for the person who wants to support the grieving person. But we also have a lot of comments that, again, I've done almost 5,000 coaching sessions. So I've heard a lot of stuff and my jaw was dropped. I was just like, what are people thinking, right? I mean, I'll give you one that is just completely dumbfounding. A woman lost her husband. I believe it was at the funeral or a few weeks later. Her coworker or boss, sorry, I haven't read the book in a while. I'm forgetting a little bit. But either her coworker or her boss said to her, "Don't worry, your husband is in heaven, and he's probably got another girlfriend by now."
Oh.
Like that type of stuff. Like, and the book is just full of jaw-dropping comments that. How do you think that's helpful? Like, how in any way is that helpful?
Yeah.
But again, this is real stuff that people hear on a daily basis. And then we wonder, why do people hide their grief? Why is grief shame a real thing? Why aren't people more honest about their pain? It's because of stuff like that, because of what we see in this book.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And you made me think about the relationship of work and grief. That it's a really interesting conundrum. The things that especially bosses or supervisors feel like it's okay for them to say. I have had several people tell me that they went back to work just as soon as they could, and they got flack from their boss, and he'd say, "Aren't you over that yet?" Or you can't cry while you're at work, all these things. And to me, it's just incredibly rude to say something like that. I know work is important, and that's why you're there, but you're going to get a whole lot more out of an employee if you're kind to them.
I had a lot of loss in my life before my wife. Most notably, my dad passed when I was 24, so 2008. In 2010, I think it was, shortly before Michelle came back into my life, because we dated in high school and reunited as adults, I had a coworker who I was really fond of suddenly lose her husband. She came back to work about 5 or 6 days later. And I remember thinking to myself, how is this human back at work? Like, how is she here? Right? Like, I can't even imagine the pain. And that's what you just said is in the book too. Like, bosses telling people stop crying, siblings, cousins, whatever, saying like, aren't you over this? Again, it goes back to our society just doesn't understand grief, and it makes us feel even more lonely. If you're a widowed person, you didn't just lose your spouse, who was probably your best friend, and they were your future. Now you're living in this world where it feels like nobody understands you. And again, even worse than nobody understanding you, people don't even respect your pain. And it's so difficult. There are no words to even properly articulate how difficult experiencing that is.
It's incredible. When you mentioned your dad, I was thinking about when my dad died. I was teaching at the university, and it was sudden. Nobody knew it was going to happen. It just happened. And it took a week off because there were things I had to do to help my mom with, and things. It was a lot of stuff. And when I came back and when I was gone, I was about an hour away from where I worked, but nobody came to one friend came. No, she came to my mom's funeral, not my dad's funeral. Nobody from work came to the funeral. Nobody from work sent a card, sent flowers. But more than that, when I got back, it was like nothing ever happened. Nobody said anything to me. And I kept thinking, how can you do that? How can you not hold my hand or pat me on the back or something? You don't have to say something, just an acknowledgement that my life is totally changed right now.
Right. I think that's another thing. We have a page about this in the book as well. Like, is it better to just say nothing at all? Well, I mean, if you're going to say something unbelievably hurtful and stupid, I suppose it's better. But no, that's not the answer either. And again, it's so simple. Like, we don't have to overthink this. You just look at that hurting human, you give them a hug, right? You say, I can't imagine your pain. Like, I'm sorry. If you ever want to tell me a funny story, or if you need a shoulder to cry on, I'm here. We don't have to overthink this, but when you say nothing, it's a slap in the face. It's like you said, you're not acknowledging that the worst thing in my life just happened. You're not acknowledging that my heart, my present, my future, everything feels shattered. I mean, that's not the way to go either.
No, it's not. So it's not only what to not say, it's to say something, and say something kind.
Yeah. Yep. 100%.
Yeah. Wow. People will always continue to amaze me, I'm sure, with what they do or what they don't do, or what they say or what they don't say, because it's like they're trying to think about it, and things, they don't even say them directly to you. An example for me was a couple of months after my husband died. There was a big, important fundraiser that I had been working on, and I really wanted to be there for. And a mutual friend of my husband and I had told me, it was a man, and he said, if you ever want an escort to go someplace so you don't have to go alone, I would be happy to take you. I'd drive you. And that was what it was. It wasn't a date. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't anything. But I said, I really would appreciate it, because I just can't imagine driving by myself. And if somebody said something to me and I broke down, I wouldn't be able to get myself home,
Right. Yeah.
So he drove me, and we were in the lobby of the place. There were a lot of people there, and we weren't standing together. We weren't holding hands. We weren't anything. We just both happened to be at the same place. And behind me, I heard these women talking and said, can you believe that? She's on a date out already, and it's only been 2 months. I can't believe she never loved him anyway if she would do something like. And it was a conversation among several women, not just one person saying that. And she didn't say it to me, and I don't think she thought I could hear her. But oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. And you weren't even on a date, but it goes beyond that. It goes back to why I always tell people, like, you have to empower yourself to grieve the way you need to grieve. And once you do, once you've empowered yourself to grieve the way you need to grieve, you're setting the stage. So that now, once you start rebuilding, you're empowered to rebuild the way that you want to rebuild. And then once you actually want to start living again, whether that means dating, whatever it means, right? In any way, shape, or form, now you're empowered and you can start living the way you want to live. Because those that judge our grief are also going to judge how we rebuild and how we start living again. It all comes back to empowering yourself, realizing that you have walked through hell on earth and you get to do you at this point when it comes to grief and rebuilding.
Yeah, that is so important. Really, really important. And I think that experience did a whole lot to me as far as being able to allow myself to do anything. I had no interest in dating. I didn't want to do anything like that because I didn't want people to perceive me that way, because that just it broke my heart that people were talking about me like that.
Yeah.
Like my husband of 22 years with our wonderful relationship didn't mean anything when they'd say something like that.
Yeah.
So it's really important. And it also made me think, one of the things I thought about, it's not really relevant to this, but it's something that I've thought about a lot, was when I did meet my next husband that I had sworn that I wasn't going to do. I still had those feelings of I can't do this. I enjoyed his company and we were good together, enjoying each other's company, but it was hard for me to go any far beyond that because I realized I didn't feel unmarried.
Yeah, I get it.
Because when you get divorced, you're divorced.
Yeah.
And when your husband dies, they may have said in your service that until death do you part, but that doesn't mean that all of a sudden you feel like you're not married anymore.
That's so true. I mean, Michelle has been gone from this physical world for 7 years now. And I had a couple of relationships that didn't work out. And I've been in a relationship now for almost 2 years that I think is going to be the relationship that I'm in, for a long time. And I mean, with that just comes a whole new ball of what is this? Like I always say, society thinks that if you find someone special again, you're good to go. Oh, well, you're good to go. What society doesn't realize is that it can actually bring with it a new form of grief you didn't know existed.
That's
because
right.
Now maybe there's guilt or there's fear. Now there's, being happy and sad all at once. Now maybe there's comparisons that are popping into your mind or your heart and you have to tame them. Now it's, being a 38-year-old man using the word girlfriend. Like, how weird is that? I was married, right? Now it's, building a life with someone and being happy about that, but also having those thoughts pop into my head about, I didn't get to build a life with Michelle because she got sick so early. So just because you find someone special again does not mean you're quote unquote good to go. It can bring with it a whole new, ball of grief and confusion that you didn't know existed.
That's true. And you have to pay attention. You just have to pay attention. And I know I'm paying attention to me now in that I can't say I would never go out on a date with somebody, but I just can't imagine it at this point. I had one guy that a friend of mine introduced me to because she thought we'd have a good time together, and he was a nice guy. And we went once a week, we'd go for a walk on a different beach. Every time we'd find a different beach on Maui and go for a walk. And that was it. And he finally got real exasperated with me. And he goes, is this ever going to go any further than this? And I said, I don't think I can.
Yeah.
It wasn't that he wasn't nice and that I didn't enjoy his company, but it was even hard to go for walks sometime with him because he wasn't one of my husbands.
Yeah. I mean, in my third book, because this is my fourth book, the one we're talking about today, my third book is about dating as a widowed person. I think that it's so incredibly complex. When I started my coaching career, I thought, okay, I'm going to do grief coaching. I do more dating and self-growth coaching now than anything else, because again, it's not easy getting back out there. And sometimes you're looking for it. And sometimes, I think as you said with your second husband, it finds you when you aren't looking.
That's exactly what happened.
Right. Sometimes you can tell the guy who you do the weekly walk with on the beach, you're not interested. But sometimes you're not looking and it's too strong and you can't turn it down. So dating as a widowed person is a very interesting thing, right?
Yes, absolutely. And, I am so glad that you're dealing with that because there just aren't that many guys doing this kind of work out there. I know most of the people that come to any of the things that I'm doing are all women. And I'm sure part of that's because I'm a woman, but I can't say I can't, but I have a hard time getting guys to talk about grief and to deal with it.
Me too, my friend. Me too. 95% of my clients are women. And when I go to grief conferences to speak, a vast majority of the people in attendance are women. I think, again, we live in a society where men are not supposed to be open about their feelings. We're not supposed to talk about pain. We're not supposed to cry. I mean, I know it's 2023, but I think that's still here. Like, that's still the society we live in. And the result is 95% of my clients are women. A lot of the stuff you do, women. You go to a grief conference, mostly women. Guys, it's okay. You're human. You're human. Like, we're human. I'm not afraid to cry because I'm human, right?
That's right. Yeah, I know I did one grief retreat. It was for Unity Church at Unity Village in Missouri. And it was almost equal guys and girls and guys and women. Mm-hmm. And it was so cool in that atmosphere to be able to talk and talk to them and have them talk and cry and whatever it is that we needed to do. And it was so powerful. And it was especially powerful to me to see the guys doing what I would love to do with a lot more guys that just don't allow themselves the vulnerability of expressing their grief. For them, it's easier to hide. And I don't think that's healthy.
I think that, look, I started my blog a month after my wife died with no intention of it being anything, no intention of books or coaching or speaking. I started it because I needed a place to process my grief. And it took off. And when I think about, why did it take off in popularity? Like, why did people want to follow you? Because I was a 31-year-old Caucasian man pouring my heart out to the world. We're not supposed to do that, right? We're supposed to be strong and put on our brave faces. And I got a lot of judgment for that throughout the years. But I have had more people who I've been able to help and who have told me that I've inspired them. When we show our heart, our pain, our joy, our hope, everything, there's going to be people that judge us, no matter if we're man or woman, it doesn't matter. But we're going to inspire more people.
That's right. That's right. So it's just as important, if not more important, for us to be open than everybody else, so that we can welcome what people need to share and what they need to deal with.
Yep.
Well, I have enjoyed this conversation so much. I just love to talk to you. And I'm so excited about this book because I just think everybody needs to read it.
Thank you.
So I encourage all my listeners out there to buy this book right now, and it'll blow you away. It will truly blow you away.
Thank you.
So thank you for being my guest, and I'm sure we'll be in touch more.
Yes, I'll see you soon, hopefully.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I'll be back with my podcast again. So be sure to tune in. Thanks for listening. Do you want more comfort, support, and happingess? Join the Grief and Happiness Alliance. Visit my website at lovingandlivingyourwaythroughgrief.com and read my book, Loving and Living Your Way Through Grief. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast, rate it, review it, and binge on all our episodes on grief and happiness. I can't wait to welcome you back to another episode